why push? Why take the risk? Why push further and harder? I have noticed with human performance, you are either playing offense or you are getting worse. I have almost never seen stable. I find that people do well when they think they are progressing, when they are pushing, when they are going, I am trying to get better. I am trying to get better. I am trying to improve, especially if you can see that incremental improvement. People do very well in those situations. As soon as people turn around and start playing defense, that is when I see people rapidly fall off.
Welcome back, team. Happy Sunday or Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday, I guess. Another week here with Drew and Alex and the Mops and Mo's Fireside Chats. And Alex, I have a question for you. How old was the world's oldest dog?
I don't know, 25?
Higher.
Higher. 30.
Mhm. 30. But here's where it gets tricky. Apparently, Bobby, the dog, who was 30 and is now dead, apparently they lied. He wasn't actually 30. Could not be proven. The Guinness World Record organization, I didn't know they do this, but like this dog died and they were like, wait a second. I think you were lying. So
Did they
Bobby,
rescind the record?
well, yeah. And they don't know who is the new record holder.
Have
And
Have you heard about the Guinness World Record about the tallest structure situation? The tallest matchstick structure situation? Sorry.
no.
So
What?
a guy was going for the tallest matchstick structure, and the way he was building it, he built a really tall Eiffel Tower out of matchsticks. And it was an incredibly annoying process because what he had to do was like pull the sparking part off of every match and just stack the sticks to make the structure. And because of the quantity of matchsticks he was going through, he realized it would be way faster to just call the match company and be like, hey, can you send me the sticks without the match heads? And so when Guinness came to
It's not a
evaluate his
matchstick
structure,
anymore.
they disqualified him because they determined that wasn't acceptable. And there was massive public outrage. And
I
eventually they
mean,
decided to give him the record because it still is the same stick. He just didn't have to pull the match heads off.
but it's just a stick. It's a raw material.
And now we get into a deep rabbit hole of
When does
all
life
of the Guinness
begin?
records are stupid. They're all very bad.
Well, it's a marketing.
Have you seen the push-up record video?
Yeah, it's a joke.
Those are not push-ups.
Looks like an army commercial.
There's some
Sorry, too close to home.
stupid. I mean, I work around the Air Force now, and Air Force push-ups are worse than Army push-ups.
Does Space Force do push? Can you do push-ups in zero gravity? Probably not. Just float.
Uh, you'd have to like hook your feet in somehow, and you'd have to be able to pull yourself back in because you nothing would pull you back. You have to do it on like a bar that you're holding onto.
Well, yeah. So Bobby, the dog,
Back to your
was
story.
was 31 years and 165 days,
But
apparently.
we don't know.
We don't know. So
They
they
just made it
disputed
up.
it, and I guess they used microchip evidence that was wrong. I've never heard of this. I almost said brand. I've never heard of this species before.
Nope,
Raffiero do Alentejo.
got nothing.
Raffiero do Alentejo from Portugal. Here's a fun fact. The previous oldest dog ever, you don't have a kid, so this wouldn't be as cool to you, but the previous oldest dog was from Australia, and that dog's name was Bluey.
That's pretty good. I
Which is pretty
appreciate it. How old
interesting.
is Bluey?
Bluey was 29 years and 5 months, but Bluey died in 1939. So
Don't
there's
tell all the
been,
kids who are hyped on Bluey that Bluey died.
well, I want to find out if Bluey the cartoon is named after Bluey the previous oldest dog.
Well, you'll have to tell us in the next episode.
Well, so this is a funny quote from Danny Chambers. Danny Chambers from the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons, which is in the UK. His quote about Bobby, the fake old dog, he says that, quote, not a single one of his vet colleagues believed that the dog actually lived to 31. There's a picture of
Yikes.
this. There's a picture of this old dog next to this certificate. He's just, now he's dead. And they're like, hey, you aren't actually as old as you said you were. So anyway, I don't know how to transition this into what
I
we're
was going to
talking
say,
about
if you had
today.
a way to transition that one into the episode, I
Well, I
was
was
going
gonna
to be
say,
blown
speaking
away.
of old things, but like he's not old.
No, and he's already getting offended now
I
listening to the
know.
episode.
Go for it.
Our strapping young guest on this episode, Lieutenant Colonel Justin Elliott, call sign Astro. Actually, depending on when you're listening to this, possibly a colonel already. Astro went to Yale, where he was a D1 collegiate swimmer and a mechanical
Small
engineering
school.
major.
Probably haven't heard of that one. Just a
Yeah,
small
he
school up
embraced
north.
the high performer life pretty early. Um, he graduated and commissioned in the Air Force in 2005 and went on to fly the F-15E in Afghanistan, including participating in the Battle of Kamdesh, which you may be familiar with from either Red Platoon or the Outpost. That's Cop Keating for those who follow Army history kind of stuff. He went on to get a master's degree in aerospace engineering and a master's degree in flight test engineering. He is a graduate of the United States Air Force's Weapons School and Test Pilot School. He commanded the 59th Test and Evaluation Squadron, which includes all 6 fighter and attack jets in one squadron. And then most recently commanded the Thunderbirds, the demonstration crew. He
They
was
flew over
Thunderbird
the
1.
I didn't realize they flew over the Super Bowl.
They sure did.
Yeah. So
And he just wrapped up that command, so he was not in command of the Thunderbirds for that demonstration. He is now at the NATO Defense College in Rome. Some fun side facts he included for us. He is the first person in history to complete all 3 of the Air Force's elite flying programs, so Weapons School, Test Pilot School, and the Thunderbirds.
no big deal.
He pulled together fighter breathing knowledge from 9 different communities into one unifying brief to explain fighter physiological performance across disparate communities. You will hear a lot about that in this episode. And then, as a result of that, he is a founding member of COPE Fighter, which is characterizing and optimizing the physiological environment in fighters. He founded Crowdsourced Flight Test, pulling together flight test data from fielded forces to avoid test environment stovepipes from different airframes and things like that. And probably the coolest one here, he was a finalist in the NASA Astronaut 2017 board. And while he was in the 2021 board, he withdrew from that process to accept command of the Thunderbirds.
As you do,
Casual stuff.
when you're faced with, we're all faced with choices like that. Should I be an astronaut or should I command an elite flying team? I've been there. I get it,
Yeah. Yeah.
Totally
Everyday kind
understandable.
of decisions.
For sure. Yeah, so we have a lot of cool people on this podcast that do a lot of cool things. Meanwhile, here's Alex and I just kind of bantering about. But I think at least for me, maybe for you, this was one of the coolest conversations we've had, I think. Maybe for me, I had just watched the movie The Right Stuff, which if you haven't seen that movie, you should. It's all about kind of the founding of NASA and human spaceflight, and it gets into a lot of the test pilot stuff. And so to then actually talk to a real life test pilot, like I was pumped. Love talking to pilots. I think it's super cool. But this conversation was, I think, particularly interesting because here we have somebody who's not only incredibly intelligent, but is also actively looking for solutions to some problems that these guys and gals face when they're flying these high-speed aircraft. And quite frankly, as somebody who's only really ever worked with ground forces, I had never even conceptualized that these issues would be issues. And oh, not to mention, he commanded the Thunderbirds, which most people are probably familiar with the Blue Angels. The Thunderbirds is the same thing, but for the Air Force. And so each one of those conversations could probably be an episode in and of itself. And to be able to have both of them was just awesome.
I also think there's a really cool conversation in here. As you heard kind of from the intro, there is a lot of focus here on breathing, breath control, breath work kind of stuff. It's a popular topic right now in a lot of different circles. Obviously, in the cockpit of a fighter pilot is an in extremis version of breath control,
Good word. It's
but
Latin. It's a Latin
a
word.
lot of you guys have probably seen some of the headlines around, particularly the F-35, but it was not only the F-35 having pilot breathing issues. Um, I first heard about it with the F-35, but Colonel Elliott definitely introduces us to earlier issues pre F-35 with it and issues across airframes. And the takeaway there was it was not necessarily an airframe issue. It's not really an engineering issue. It is a human performance issue around breath control and breath work and regulating anxiety type of feelings in really extreme environments. And there's definitely applicability there. Whether you fly anything or not, breath control has its place in kind of managing the stress of high intensity situations.
And I think too, for people who are kind of into the latest and greatest cutting edge sort of tactical human performance conversations around where this industry might be going in the next couple of years, and where we might start seeing different pockets of the military investing in this type of thing. I think the fighter pilot community is a fascinating one. And one of the, I guess, things I hadn't even really considered until we've started having more of these conversations with pilots is that it truly is first generation humans trying to manage and manipulate. What are we on now? Like fifth generation, sixth generation?
Something like that.
Something like that. Fifth generation machines. And so we're kind of inevitably headed towards a point where as long as humans are manning these things, they're going to have to deal with ever increasing stresses and ever increasing problem sets. So, like we said at the top, super fascinating episode. Real shame that Bobby lied on his birth certificate. He wasn't as old as he said, but yeah, strap in and enjoy the show. Define measures of performance, Alex. Measures of effectiveness.
Oh, am I going first? Oh,
Yeah.
man, fine. Love that you recognize the term. It's certainly in joint doctrine JP30. People are already tuning out of the podcast because I'm referencing doctrinal publications.
I got a text this week from a guy talking smack about how often you refer to doctrine, by the way. But keep going.
Man, it was my job. I still, whatever. It's fine. The way we apply it to fitness, or at least the way I applied it to fitness at the beginning of this whole journey, was I borrowed a little audience interaction exercise that one of our previous guests, Mark Taysom, used to do. It's awesome. His is a little bit funnier than mine, but the way you do it is like you get in front of a group of people and you ask them, how do you know if a workout was good? And consistently the answers are sore, tired, and sweaty. All right, awesome. That's how we're measuring it. I'll give you the fastest, best workout of your life. Meet me in the sauna at 2 a.m. and I'll punch you in the face. Like sore, check. You got punched in the face. Tired, check. It's the middle of the night. Sweaty, you're in the sauna. Awesome. We've met all the criteria. Good to go. Clearly, that doesn't mean the workout was effective at anything in particular. And so that opens up a conversation about like, do we even have a goal? Do we know what our goal is? Are we measuring progress towards that goal? What's the desired end state? And I think that's something that gets missed in the fitness conversation a lot. You don't normally see like doctrinal analytical concepts applied to fitness, but I think it's worth doing sometimes.
Okay, that's incredibly analogous to flight test in the Air Force. And
Awesome.
I have to elaborate. We measure aircraft through measures of performance, i.e., how closely do they meet their specifications, which were often set by requirements that were made a long time ago. Sometimes well before the enemy changed its way of thinking and well before the scenarios we face today are in effect, right? When we first designed the aircraft, we set out these specifications of performance that it has to meet. And very different from that, we have measures of effectiveness, which is how well do these things perform their mission in actual combat in a scenario that that you're going to see today. And so the reason flight test in the Air Force is so difficult is because when you set your requirements for those performance specifications, I mean, I'm not kidding. It can be 2 decades before this thing sees its first flight. And by the time you get your hands on it, you're measuring those performance goals. And sometimes it meets every single one of them, every single specifications that, it meets perfectly. But it's completely ineffective in the new threat environment that it's going to face when it goes out the door. So you can face these extremely difficult challenges where it's like, okay, the contractor did every single thing that we told them to do 20 years ago. They did it. And yet we still have to fail this thing because it's not going to be effective in combat. You can have it vice versa too. You can have something that pops up that's extremely effective for the mission we need it for, but doesn't meet any of its requirements. And that makes things difficult to settle out on the contracting side too. So not dissimilar. Effectiveness and performance are two very different things.
Well, and as you're saying that, and we have had this conversation with, I would say, the majority of our guests, just kind of to get different perspectives. But I do think back to when I was working with the Air Force, and same thing happens now with the Army, but they view human performance and human beings through that same kind of, call it a mechanical lens. I remember with the Air Force, it was like, hey, whenever you brief senior leaders, understand that most of them are pilots and they think about things as far as checklists and red, yellow, greens and all that kind of thing. And it will benefit you to look at the human being the same way. And now with the Army, substitute, airplane for Humvee or tank, and it's the same conversation. And I think there's not really a question wrapped into this, but I do find it interesting that so much of the way the military thinks about things is through hardware, and they want human beings to be hardware, and it doesn't account for the squishy stuff that we're starting to learn is actually probably more important than the PT tests and the red, yellow, greens and the checklists.
I completely agree. In fact, I would say it's one of the greatest mysteries of human performance evaluation that's still out there in the Air Force. We try so hard to come up with this Rubik's Cube of qualities that makes for a great leader or a great pilot or a great test pilot, whatever the case may be. And we have some things that I think we allocate towards those, like fitness performance, academic performance, GPA in high school, and then some more arbitrary things like leadership potential, hands and feet flying ability, for example. And it leads to this desire to have a checklist, right? Like a box checking checklist that will tell me who the best high schooler is coming out of high school right now in America. That's definitely going to be the best fighter pilot in the world. And I just don't think it exists. If it does exist, I can tell you the checkpoints are not has bachelor's degree, has master's degree, got 100 on fitness tests, etc. It is there's a resolution in that cube
Mm-hmm.
of facets that's got to be much, much higher than what we're looking at now.
Mm-hmm.
I completely agree. It's there's something that we are not accounting for, something in, as you say, the squishy stuff that I don't know that we've cracked this code yet.
Can you, if it's not too much of a jump, we've had, I would say the majority of the pilots we've had on have been from the A-10 community. And I think probably has something to do with having General Drally on first. But, attack plane versus fighter aircraft, whatever you want to call it. I'm curious, in your experience flying the aircraft you have flown, what the, I guess, human element of that looks like versus an A-10.
It's tough because I have flown basically everything else. So to be able to say that I can tell you what it's like to fly an A-10 in combat, I can't. That's an aspect I'm missing. I'll give it my best shot. I think all fighters and attack platforms face a situation where decision agility is everything. Probably similar to what you face in a ground scenario. When things get difficult, they get difficult because you are being asked to make decisions on far less than perfect information. This thing that I call operational intelligence, right? I think we've heard people talk about intelligence like IQ, and then now a much more popular growing interest in EQ or emotional intelligence. I personally believe there's a third one called operational intelligence. That is far less accounted for. I've never heard anyone use that term, by the way. I just made it up, but I think it's the third piece of the triangle. I think it's what you see professional athletes do, and I would kind of define it as making decisions with far less than perfect information. Maybe 20, 30, 40% of the information you wish you had to make a decision, and yet you have to decide, and you have to decide now. The A-10 pilots face that because of very dynamic ground scenarios where they're trying to sort friendlies from hostiles in an environment where somebody needs guns or bombs on target immediately. Fighter pilots face the exact same scenario in the sky where you have waves of targets coming at you. Sometimes they're stealth aircraft that are not picked up until far closer than normal airplanes. You know roughly what the enemy fighter force has done and what they are likely to do. You know roughly what your forces are supposed to have done. But when you're trying to manage up to 100 aircraft in a large force exercise, it's impossible to have 100% of the information. You'll never have it. You'll never have anything more than, I would say, about 40%. And yet you have to decide. And I think that's where that operational intelligence comes in, whether that be fighters or slow movers in dynamic ground scenarios. It's there. And it's something I don't know how to find that in the general population to bring into the military until they've been in scenarios like that. The closest I can come up with is sports.
So go ahead, Drew.
I have a weird riff as you're talking about this, and this might be because I just started watching Masters of the Air last night, and obviously there's all kinds of cool cinematic, we're in the sky, we're fighting. Does the speed at which fighter aircraft move now, does that change what you're talking about with regards to the operational intelligence? And I'm kind of thinking of like the cognitive element where as aircraft get faster, I would imagine that the time within which you can engage the other, like the enemy, shrinks because everybody's flying around so quickly. What does that do to the equation when we think of that operational intelligence element? Have we kind of outpaced the human's ability to take in everything that's happening in a given battle space?
I had a friend say this better than anyone I've ever heard. Dr. Ryan Mays from 711th Human Performance Wing in the Air Force. Yeah, he said we've got first generation humans flying fifth generation aircraft.
Nice.
And
That's exactly what I was
is
thinking.
exactly what it is, right? I mean, we are exactly the same thing evolutionarily that we were when we were, if we wanted to get to 14,000 feet, we had to slowly walk up the mountain one step at a time. And our bodies adapted to that altitude change because it took us, days to get up
Mhm.
to 14,000 feet. And so, our bodies are meant to adapt that way, even from a physical perspective. Now I can zoom from 0 to 14,000 feet in about a second and a half. We have compensations in the cockpit on the physical side, but on the mental side, gosh, there's so many places we go with this. From just a speed perspective, I'll talk about that a little bit first. From just a like velocity perspective, a lot of our combat adapts for that with distance. So as the jets move faster, the missiles fly farther, the missiles fly faster as well. Therefore, the shot ranges are farther away
Mhm.
for both sides. And so the speed of the combat is probably not terribly dissimilar from what they were facing in World War II. It just all happened much closer. I think that what's changed is the absolutely overwhelming amount of information that's coming at you in those long range fights. Because when you're talking about shooting and fighting over ranges that, let's just say fighter to fighter, fighter to bomber, we're talking about nearly 100 miles. When you start rolling in hypersonic weaponry and some of the surface to air missile systems that are going Mach 6 right now, you're talking about pushing those shot ranges back to where you are threatened hundreds of miles away from the
Mhm.
target. And so, what I have found the most difficult reality to deal with is my brain goes, that piece of land is hundreds of miles away. It is no threat to me. It shouldn't even be a concern to me. I've got nearer, hotter threats that are a problem, but yet there are things on that piece of land very far away that are already shooting, that are already locking, acquiring, and launching weapons. And if I don't react to those, then those are going to kill me. It is fascinating how your concept of distance on what's too far away to matter has to shift and adapt to the speed of combat right now.
Mhm.
So, despite being a normally human performance podcast, Drew is obsessed with airframes. I am going to try and keep this relatively on track to the topics we had sort of planned
I
at the
could
beginning.
spiral on this
We
stuff
didn't
all day
even
long.
mention one. Fortunately, we haven't even
No,
talked about a platform. That's good.
there you go.
See, I've gotten better. Wait till I ask you what your favorite plane is. That'll be at the
That's
end.
coming at the end. You're going
That's
to
at
have
the
that
end.
one so you can start
Yeah,
brainstorming.
chew on that for a little bit.
So to bring us to one of the topics you brought up when we initially had a conversation, and not something I think Drew or I had really thought about as a direction to go with this, but the physiology of breathing in the cockpits of these aircraft in the situations we're putting them in. I know in the space we're in, breathing is like a hot topic in the fitness space, right? Everybody's excited about Wim Hof stuff or vagal tone or whatever you want to go down the rabbit hole on. But for you guys, it's a life or death conversation in the fighter aircraft community. So just to do some stage setting for people who haven't thought about this issue at all, can you dive into what you and the community have learned in the last decade or so about pilot breathing issues in flight? And I'll ask too, I've seen headlines specific to the F-35 on this issue. Is it an F-35 issue? Is it a hardware issue, or is it a bigger issue than that?
It's bigger. It's bigger. And I can't tell you how heartwarming it is to hear that the Army's hot on this right now too. It is red flaming hot in the Air Force right now. It is 2018 was probably its peak of like right on the front pages of Congress and the newspapers because it was affecting the F-35. I'll tell you that it was affecting our platforms long before that. We just didn't have the background or knowledge to understand why. And so I'm going to take you back to 2012. Um, so in 2012, that was actually the first time we made headline news with our breathing issues in the Air Force. It was F-22. Two pilots went on 60 Minutes, basically said, "Hey, I can't breathe in this airplane. I'm quitting the Air Force. I don't want to fly it anymore." Which blew people's mind, got a lot of attention. And just like you're talking about with performance in general, of course, the road that everyone went down as they tried to solve this problem was, well, I need a technical solution. I've got to figure out what that smoking gun was. Why is this one airplane has to be the problem? Why is it doing this, and how do I fix it from a technical perspective? The F-22 is an extremely high performance aircraft. I think it's important to know that right up front from the human side, but everyone went down the technical road. 2014, I was in test pilot school, and the project that my team and I tackled was to figure out what was going on with this F-22 investigation back from 2012, which was closed. And I put air quotes on that because it was closed, but there were a lot of people in the medical world that had questions and theories, and some really interesting ones at that. And so we specifically went out to test this concept called the work of breathing, which, put very simply, means the amount of work that you are doing to breathe. If it is taking more work out of your body than you are gaining from the oxygen carbon dioxide exchange in your lungs during that breath, well, then you're actually getting negative benefits from that breath. So this work of breathing concept was fascinating at the time in 2014. We strapped on some gear to try to mirror what the F-22 pilots were dealing with. So there were two main issues. One was that the F-22, because it flew so high and so fast, they wore an upper pressure garment. So almost like a sort of a pressure suit, but it was just over your chest, and it was attached to your G suit. It was a full body G suit, and it would squeeze really hard down on your abs and in your chest while you were pulling high Gs. The F-22 could do up to 10 G. So it was squeezing not just your lower limbs to keep that blood in your brain, but also squeezing your torso to keep that blood in your brain. And you got to understand that the theory behind that was sound. The idea was we're going to squeeze everything to keep that blood up in your brain at that high G. The problem is, even if it was effective at extremely high Gs, what happens when you let off the G? Have you put yourself so far behind from a physical perspective that your work of breathing against that restriction is not enough to catch back up before you pull back on the stick again? So that was one problem they were dealing with. So we over tightened all of our gear to try to match that. The second thing was the jet was built with a flow meter, if you will, like a plenum that regulated flow of oxygen to the mask. So this is about flow rate, not the quantity of oxygen that you're getting in that breath, but the flow rate of that oxygen. And the theory was that a human would never breathe more than about 183 liters per minute in any situation they could come up with, high physical activity on the ground, et cetera. So they made the plenum, they made the flow rate about 200 liters per minute to be more than you would ever need. Well, come to find out, in fighter maneuvering, in a high performance aircraft under G, pilots were demanding closer to 300, almost 400 liters per minute of air from a system that was only able to give them 200. And so you can imagine that feeling of like sucking rubber, where it's not about the number of oxygen molecules coming in, it's about the flow rate, right? You are pulling against this mask, trying to get air into your lungs that isn't there at that max demand. And you can imagine that environment's going to create a lot of work for your body. So when we went out and looked at this, we had a restrictive hose to match what the F-22 had. We had a over tightened pressure vest on. We went out and we did 3 weeks of centrifuge time, which was one of the highlights of poor life quality of my life. So it's really something to sit in the centrifuge for repeated high G runs. And then we went out and did it in F-16s, which is a very high performance airplane as well. And what we found was that work of breathing is definitely a thing, but the effects it has on your body are even more interesting, because we noticed that all of the pilots were compensating for that high workload in their lungs by taking short, fast, shallow breaths. And this is where this gets interesting. You can kind of imagine this. If you were pulling against a major restriction, whether that be through a hose or if you tied a rubber band around your chest, if you take big, deep breaths against that rubber band, it's going to hurt, right? That's going to be hard because you're stretching the rubber band further. It's putting more resistance on you. But if you just take short, fast, shallow breaths, you're not really going to hit that resistance as much. Now, nobody thinks about this consciously. No pilot could have even told you this was happening, but we saw it in the data because we had data regulators all over us. And so we saw that every pilot was taking short, fast, shallow breaths to compensate for that restriction. And that looks a lot like hyperventilation. And when you hyperventilate, oxygen doesn't become the problem anymore. Carbon dioxide does. Because just like kids that used to pass out, right, by like hyperventilating as fast as they can in high school and then, passing out in class, that's a thing because you off gas too much carbon dioxide and your brain then knocks you out and goes, I'm done with you. You're messing up your blood pH right now. And this is where it kind of blew open the entire concept of Air Force, I guess, safety in flight when it comes to how to solve breathing problems, because all of our training, every single thing that we learned fell into two categories. Either I didn't have enough oxygen, so I solved that by hitting myself with a high dose of oxygen, or I had just had a rapid decompression and I was in basically, the same situation that divers are in when they come up to surface too fast. And the problem was blood bubbles and. So none of those were the problem here, right? You're hyperventilating, you're getting rid of carbon dioxide. If I follow the Air Force training procedures and I hit full oxygen, that does exactly nothing to solve a carbon dioxide problem. So now you've put yourself in this psychological state. I want you to imagine this. You feel terrible. You feel like you're hypoxic. It matches all the symptoms you've been told to look for that tell you, hey, you're about to pass out because you're hypoxic. And so now you do what the checklist says. You throw your regulators to full blast. You get 100% O2. You feel it hit you in the face, and nothing happens. You don't get better. And so now you're going to panic. You feel even worse because you think you've done everything. You've exhausted your checklist. You have nothing left to solve this problem. And so now you're going to hyperventilate even more, which is going to off gas more carbon dioxide, which is going to make things feel even worse. And the ultimate state of that is it's hypocapnia, where you've now your blood pH has now changed, and it takes 10 to 15 minutes to recover once you've solved the problem. So I know this seems like a doomsday scenario, right? And it very much was for a lot of pilots. When we started taking this from the F-22 out to other communities, we found out that all of them were having these problems and just didn't know how to define it or talk about it. There was actually, unfortunately, there was an F-15C fatal crash. There was another F-15 situation where they barely made it back in a completely incapacitated state after having a work of breathing hypocapnia issue. The F-35 does very similar things to you via different mechanism. It has an overpressure in the mask. It's actually, again, it was built to help you. It's not, no one was trying to hurt us here. It just, they thought more was better when it came to O2 and flow. And so it actually puts you in a situation where you're having to push against this constant overpressure at all times. The F-18, especially the Super Hornet version on the Navy side, is probably, well, by far has the highest number of incidents where pilots are coming back in a really bad state. So this crosses branches. This is not just an Air Force thing. And the good news is, through just education, you can take pilots so far. Because once you understand that hypocapnia is a thing and that you got there with hyperventilation, most likely, right? Most likely you got there with hyperventilation, and that it doesn't cure quickly. The good news is the way I briefed this to everybody, I went on a round robin throughout the entire Air Force, like talking to every pilot training base about this. And my conclusion after all of it, after seeing this across 9 different communities of jet type, including the A-10, by the way, they had hypoxia issues on the ground, which is completely impossible. It's like there's no lack of oxygen on the ground. So what I told everybody was, hey, look, just go to Colorado. Right, we can all live at 6,000 feet, in open, fresh air, right? We don't need hoses and regulators and all that stuff attached to us to live in Colorado. So just go to Colorado, take your mask off, chill out. like put the autopilot on and just let your body like get back to okay. And once people had the confidence to understand, okay, this is a CO2 problem, that's not going to fix itself by overdosing with O2, and just the confidence to understand that if your cabin, if your cockpit is at 6,000, 8,000 even feet, which it is through most of the flight envelope, then you can take the high performance gear off and just let your body be a human again, and be that first generation human being that's just trying to adapt to an environment that's not completely hostile, and then come back and land when you're not at the max state of incapacitation. Which is what a lot of people are doing, right? Because can you imagine, like, you've exhausted your checklist and you're like, well, according to the rate that this is degrading, I'm dying in 10 seconds. So I better point this airplane at a runway and go as fast as I can go to try to get my wheels on the ground before I die. Where it's not true. It's just that that's exactly how it would feel. But you can just chill out in the air and start to recover. So huge discoveries from this, like huge discoveries on the education side. On the systems side, yeah, exactly. None of that is going to be fixed quickly with a technical fix, right? Like the smoking gun, different in every jet. The causes are different in every jet. You can think of it, we now think of it as a disappearing margin around the human brain, right? Like you start with all your faculties when you take off, and things eat away at that margin. Maybe it's overpressure in your mask, maybe it's overpressure on your chest, maybe it is your breath rate, maybe it's your level of panic that day. The point is, however you got there, you got there. And recovery means stop being a fighter pilot for a second and start being a human being, and know that your body just needs to readapt to 1G.
Well, for what it's worth, as a guy who recently moved to Colorado, I think the just go to Colorado solution tends to work for most things. So
That's not true. It's a
Yeah.
horrible place to live. This is an ongoing debate on this podcast about the pros and
Yeah.
cons of Colorado.
it's
But
the place to be.
I do. This might be a stretch, but I'm curious if there's a place in all of that for like diaphragmatic training, quote unquote. But I'm thinking of episodes we've done in the past talking about energy system development and the role that oxygen actually plays in that versus traditionally how we think that it works. And there's sort of a niche corner of the human performance space that is looking at actually training the diaphragm as a muscle and what implications that has on the human's ability to intake more oxygen, utilize more oxygen. And I'm just curious if that does that solve in any way for any of this, or is it just so far off the mark?
That it does, in fact.
Because if we just solve the Air Force's problems, I mean, we're happy to help facilitate.
Yeah. Well, so already just on this very brief discussion with you two, I've heard you say things about breathing that are interesting and different than what the Air Force is looking at. And integrating with the Navy, by the way, all of this research at this point is going through this conference that happens every 6 months called COPE Fighter, characterizing and optimizing the physiological environment of fighters. It is a very informal gathering of everyone from doctors to PhDs to engineers that make the stuff to the pilots that fly it. And I don't really still to this day know how we pulled this off and made an informal conference that happens, but we did. And it was very obvious to me to invite the Navy pilots and the Marine pilots and the Air Force pilots. And now I deeply regret not inviting you guys and the high performance folks from the Army. Because I give you one example that when we first, what I'll call, uncovered the hypocapnia, and we thought, wow, there's this phenomenon that no one has ever heard of, in the whole world. And we're the first ones. We've discovered hypocapnia. But it turns out it's a very well known thing in other walks of life. One of the examples that came up were special forces folks, who will actually intentionally hyperventilate to off-gas CO2 to get that desire to breathe out of their brain so they can swim underwater for extremely long periods of time. Because CO2 drives your desire to breathe, right? And So to them, they were like, yeah, hypocapnia, we do that on purpose. I was like, well, it kills us, so that's good. That we're sharing, right? Like we're sharing information. I tell you that because whatever exercises you've got that you're thinking about, the answer is probably yes. One of the things we discovered with G suits that's less understood, but it's called atelectasis. Have you guys ever heard of that?
No.
It sounds
Only because of your
fancy.
email before this podcast.
Fancy
Okay,
as
okay.
hell.
All right, all right. Atelectasis is effectively when part of your lungs stop functioning. They're not dead or anything. It's just that you've either not used it or you've crushed it to the point that G forces do this to us, for example, where the G will push down on your blood in your lungs to where it engorges some of the alveoli in the bottom part, right? Where you imagine that blood like pooling in the lower ones from that high G. Now you have this mismatch between the amount of blood that's down there and the amount of oxygen it's able to take in. The alveoli will then close and stick shut, and then your body shunts them off. It's like, okay, those aren't doing anything for me, so I'm just going to cut that pipe. It'll shunt them off and just use the ones that are functional. You have no awareness of this other than, again, your breath rate tends to shallow out. Reference other chain of events we just talked about. But I'm going to stick to this atelectasis thing for a while because it would lead to what we used to call the raptor cough, where you would have this like shallow cough that was constant for like 24 hours sometimes after landing, and it was unexplained. But this raptor cough, raptor pilots will tell you all about it. It wasn't a violent cough, it wasn't a sick cough, it was this shallow cough that they would have for just like a long period of time. The cure for it is a like a max breath, right? Like it's a spirometry breath. So you basically inhale as high and deep as you possibly can, and then you exhale as fast and long as you possibly can. You would blow every single bit of air out of your lungs that you possibly can at the highest rate possible, right? So this forced breath, this all the way in, fill everything up, all the way out as fast and hard as you can. That is like a reset to your lungs, and we know it works. So if you do this, by the way, no pilot does this in flight because they don't know that they should, and it's the last thing you would ever think to do. But it turns out if you do this forced vital capacity breath all the way in, all the way out, you'll actually pop all that stuff back open and regain full lung capacity. So the question I would have for researchers in relation to your breathing techniques that you guys are exploring on the Army side is could they prevent atelectasis from starting to form in the first place? Is there a periodic breathing maneuver you could do, for example, to pop everything back out and basically keep it from degrading to the point where things are starting to shut down?
Man, I knew we were going to talk breathing on this episode, but I did not expect to be talking about spirometers and inspiratory muscle trainers and stuff like that.
I just point out atelectasis sounds like one of Gwyneth Paltrow's kids.
That's probably
Yep.
true too.
When you asked if I
Yep.
heard of it, I was like, that sounds like some celebrity child. Anyway, keep going.
No, I want to sneak in a question here, staying on the breathing thing, but it ties back to what you mentioned about divers training to hold their breath for long periods. And I'm pulling this from some of the notes you sent us ahead of time, but the phenomenon where if you test F-35 pilots pre-flight or like not around a particular flight, you're getting 4+ minute breath holds out of these guys. But then if you test them post-flight, they're struggling to hold their breath for even 10 seconds. Is that an atelectasis phenomenon or is that something else?
So here's what we found. It's a little bit different than that situation. Let me just describe it just to make sure we're all on the same page. So when F-35 pilots would come back from sorties, especially when the jet was new and people had switched from other airplanes, F-16, F-15, that they were familiar with, almost without fail, you would come back for an F-35 sortie, talk to your friends and say, man, I just feel tired. Don't know why. Maybe it's the workload, but it's not. The jet's actually very easy to fly, but they just feel tired. And the ones that would feel tired to the point that they would kind of fess up and say, like, I'm not the same. Like, I feel bad. I felt bad flying. I don't feel good right now. something's different about me. Here's what was fascinating. Some of them could hold their breath for like minutes, like 3+ minutes. After this is after the flight. And like that's not normal. If any of us tried to do that right now, I don't think we'd get very close. So it was like easy for them to hold their breath for minutes. This was an effect of a sortie where they felt bad that they could hold their breath that long. Some of them would also feel bad from the flight, but could only hold their breath for like seconds. And sometimes they would actually initially be able to hold their breath for a very long time. And then as the day went on and they got more towards like where you would expect them to recover, right? Like towards nighttime, sleep time, that's when their breathing got shorter to where they could only hold their breath for a few seconds without getting that burn in their lungs, that like CO2 burn, like I got to exhale right now. So these are really weird situations, and we can start to hypothesize on what may be going on. The ones that can hold their breath for a very long time after the sortie, if they felt bad during the sortie, that was most likely hypocapnia, exactly what we were talking about. They were probably hyperventilating against that overpressure to the point that they had gotten rid of all their CO2. They felt bad, got the jet back home, and then had this superhuman breath holding capability because they had off gassed all their carbon dioxide. Um, the ones that would land and have shortness of breath, much less common, but it does kind of make sense that it's possible, because if you were to, every human's different. If you were to be the kind of person that accepts that overpressure and maybe just allows it to breathe for you, and it actually ends up deepening your breaths and lengthening your breaths, you could end up actually storing too much CO2 that way. Much to our point, what you guys brought up very early in the podcast, are fighters getting ahead of the human being inside of them. This is very possible, right? Like we are meant to compensate for taking one step at a time up a mountain, not for rapid transits through oxygen oscillations and carbon dioxide environment changes at a rapid scale. So we don't know. We don't answer that one yet, Alex. We don't know.
Again, staying on the breathing thing and specific to the sort of the diaphragmatic training we were talking about, the reason that came into my mind is because with pararescue years back, one of the things that I started to look at was, and for folks that have listened to episodes, this will be based on what Evan Pycon was talking to us about, but looking at it less from a increase your bench press, increase your deadlift, whatever, to attack your physiological limiter. Because one of the struggles I think that we have in human performance for ground-based forces is, at the end of the day, how do you quantify the quote unquote sport of combat? Like in football, it's easy. Rugby, it makes sense. Basketball, great. But what are you really training for, given the fact that combat, like you can't really define it? And so the thesis was basically, okay, if we can go at physiology instead of arbitrary performance metrics, maybe there's something there. Maybe if we figure out physiologically where someone is limited, we can attack their physiology and just make a more robust human, such that whenever the situation, shit hits the fan, they are more prepared for whatever that might be. And the diaphragmatic training was one of those things, because oxygen drives so much of the physiology. So what was limiting each individual soldier, airman, whatever, when it came to the oxygen equation? Was it the intake? Was it the, delivery? Was it the respiration? And so when you're sitting here talking about the same types of struggles in a super badass aircraft, it's like, man, I wonder if there's a corollary there. And I wonder if there's a place for that type of training so that you could get around some of that. And honestly, I think that it might end up where you already were talking about things ending up with the big, singular deep breath, just kind of activating that whole system a little bit more. I'm just, again, no question there. I'm just curious now that you started talking about it, and I'm thinking about, man, I wonder if that would be a super easy way of getting the ball rolling, and like the return on investment would be huge.
Oh yeah, and not just training. Of course, as an Air Force guy, I got to go down the technical road here. Sensors.
Mm-hmm.
We know because we did testing on this stuff. So these sensors exist. They're not scalable right now. but they're starting to become so. So as this research has started to get out, I'm seeing companies start to come forward with sensors on the human body. They come in all kinds of sizes and shapes too, by the way, everything from shirts to headbands to
Hmm.
watches to, the ones that I think would probably provide the most information for a pilot are the ones that are in the mask that at a minimum would tell me my breath rate. But wouldn't that be so simple to just at least have the hyperventilation warning, right? Like, hey man, your breath rate is in the red. I don't know why, but your breath rate is in the red. You're breathing too fast. That alone would be huge as kind of a detection of the impending doom you're about to put on yourself. And when I look at on the ground side, we wear enough gear, I think, in everything we do in combat, that if these things get small enough, they could just be part of our warning system. So I know it's something the Air Force is interested in. Right now, the warning systems are all aircraft centric. So if my oxygen system goes down, I
Hmm.
know that. You know, think about everything I told you last 30 minutes. Almost nothing that is taking these pilots down has to do with a system failure on the aircraft. Yes, that can be one entry point, right? If suddenly my oxygen regulator is at a lower flow rate than you'd expect or producing less oxygen, of course that can become a problem. But the problems are happening anyway, and we have absolutely zero detection on the human right now.
Hmm.
Zero indication of how you're doing besides your feelings, which can be quite unreliable when you're at 9 Gs and 600 miles an hour.
So I'm watching the clock and I'm starting to get worried that we're going to miss out on all the Thunderbirds pushing the limits of humans in flight stuff. But I don't want to completely let this like breathing physiology technical capability stuff go because there's a gold mine of useful discussion here, I think. But I do want to draw out a story because you mentioned it in the stuff you sent us, and it has fascinated me since I've gotten into this career field how political the human performance stuff can get. And I see it only getting more political when you introduce multi-million-dollar aircraft into the conversation. But you alluded to a pretty public Congress versus Air Force general officer situation that happened in 2018 when you guys started sharing these issues. Can you just walk us through how that went down?
Yeah, it was a tough one. It was so okay. So the F-22 thing happened 2012, the research happened 2014. We had gone down the road of educating fighter pilots. Fighter pilots were starting to understand the situation they were in. Things were going okay. In 2017, the trainers started having issues, or at least talking about issues. And so now you're talking about your T6, your T45, and your T38. So our primary trainers for the Air Force, and specifically in the Air Force, the T6s, at this point, this aircraft was getting older. It was starting to have occasional breakdowns in the oxygen systems, but the rate of physiological incidents was going up. So much so that they shut down training at some of the bases, started hitting the news. Things got really exciting, and that's when I got called in to go and brief initially with our senior leaders. Once our senior leaders heard the brief that I sent you guys, that was, hey, look, you're not alone. We've been dealing with this with a whole bunch of different platforms at this point. And while they're all different, there's a lot of similarities we can get out of just the education side alone. So Air Force senior leaders, I thought, did an awesome job of, really within days, getting me on a plane to go to each pilot training base and start to tear down some of these myths and educate folks um, on what these breathing issues can look like and how to get out of these situations. It was well received, and the Air Force was pretty happy about it. The challenge was, it's as you go up chain, as you try to take, you guys have seen the slides that I gave you. That brief takes me well researched, well practiced. It takes me a solid 45 minutes to go through at what I'll call the fifth grader level, right? To the point where I'm just getting the concepts out and the flow through the concepts to a point where you can go, okay, I get it. That's why I have to go to Colorado. Now that's proficient briefer, understands the background, just getting the main points. So brief that to a 1 star, who then briefs that to a 2 star, who briefs that to a 3 star, for example. Now that 3 star goes up against Congress. And it was not just hard, it was impossible for him to back up the claim that he was making that we can solve a lot of this with education right now. Um, and get things back on track while we work in parallel the fixes. Congress didn't want to hear it. They just basically said, you're telling me that you're going to sit here and say pilots need to breathe better, and that's your solution to the problems that we're dealing with pilot training bases shutting down, et cetera. And so it ended badly. And yet, when you're talking about acquiring the systems necessary or the fixes for individual aircraft to make this impossible, 20 years, like it can't be done. Honestly, we should focus on the next generation airplanes when it comes to fixing the breathing systems, because at any given time, you've got somewhere between 6 and 10 flying platforms that all have different systems. So we learned so much from it, and I hated that it ended, if you will, as a negative brief to Congress, because the truth is we uncovered so much through that process, and educated so many people that there are breakthroughs happening now. Not just in the education and the human performance side, but also on the way forward. So our specifications for fighter breathing systems have changed completely. They've been codified. When we design next generation fighters or upgrade systems, they are going to have these elements as part of them. Things we didn't used to think about, like flow rate and, not just the concentration of oxygen, but the fluctuations within that concentration now have specified tolerances to keep us from continually having to adapt to an environment that's changing. So it was a positive thing, but so goes it. And when you talk about politics, I find that politics plus science equals politics.
That's a
It's the
beautiful,
best. It's the best
beautiful way to
equation.
encapsulate that. Yeah.
It's the harder something is to understand, the more you're just going to apply what you wanted to hear all along
Yeah.
anyway.
Yeah.
Because you're not able to make the leap, right? So it's very easy to just say, well, I feel like it's this, so here we go. So
That's heavy.
I love that. You mentioned the 711th Human Performance Wing, and we've talked about human performance here, and I'm curious, with the rise of embedded human performance staffs and kind of similar to what you guys are seeing with everything that we've talked about from a breathing standpoint, are there conversations right now, or what does it look like for exercise science type professionals to come into that space and train pilots? Is there a way to train pilots for some of these issues, or is it more just, creating more physically robust human beings?
it's absolutely training, absolutely. And the Air Force already has some well-established physiological training routines. But like I mentioned, prior to this kind of breakout research, all of it was focused on oxygen. It was all about oxygen. It was, okay, if you feel bad, you have no oxygen, get more oxygen. Here's how you get more oxygen. So everything was based on that. And they were great hands-on training devices that we still use them. We have devices where you're flying along in a simulator and it starts to pull O2 away from your mask, and eventually you feel terrible and you can't see color anymore. And then you hit your regulator and the lights come back on, everything's good. We've been fighting pretty hard to get those updated to account for some of these other phenomena, like worker breathing, hypocapnia, atelectasis, et cetera. It's hard to do. It's hard to imitate some of that stuff. And really, you get into the sensitive side of, do I really want to put a person through that on purpose? Because some of these things can feel pretty bad and take a pretty long time to recover from. So it's always going to be a debate on how far you take it. I think it's kind of funny, by the way, because we willingly put ourselves and our brand new students through the centrifuge, which is, I can't tell you how terrible that experience is. It's really something. So we justify it for some things, but I think when it comes to recurring training, we're unwilling to go too far down the road of really getting somebody in a breakdown.
Mm-hmm.
So that weighs into it for sure. But to answer your question, I don't think we're going to build more robust human beings. Okay, maybe we can. That would be awesome. But I think training is going to be huge, and education is going to be huge. Just knowing what the threats are is enough to beat them most of the time with these phenomena. So just by training your mind to understand what's hitting you up there, it's going to get you 95% of the problem.
So I'm watching the clock, and I think we've been talking for almost an hour recorded here, and we haven't even hit the whole second topic you had for us. Before we leave behind the breathing and fitness stuff and dive into like team psychology and Thunderbird stuff and some cognitive performance things there, there was a question Drew was mentioning before you hopped on here that I do want to close out because it ties to so much of what you said. We've
Yeah.
talked about a whole bunch of unique breathing stuff, a whole bunch of unique performance stuff. I'm sure there are tons of medical evaluations pilots have to go through, various training exposures and things like that. But like true or false, the actual fitness standard that they are still held to at the end of the day is push-ups, sit-ups, and a mile and a half run.
You got it. 100% accurate.
While you hold your breath.
While you hold your breath, you can't breathe for the whole mile and a half. Yep, that's true. So the officer fitness test is the same. There is one time in pilot training you will do this other heavyweight lifting test that's supposed to be a indicator of your G tolerance, and it's all about those lower body muscles, like your the muscles that you clench to keep the blood in your brain
Are we
are
talking
your
isometric mid-thigh pull here? Is that what we're talking about?
That's basically, yes. It's
Okay.
like I would call it a weightlifting squats test. The best summary. It's been 20 years since I've been through it, but it was, and that's, by the way, that's one of the main takeaways is whether this test is valid or not, it sure isn't for 41-year-old me when I took it in my early 20s. So I think it's an indicator early on. And I'm not even sure what's done with that information because then you go to the centrifuge, which is where you actually figure out if you can handle 9Gs or not. And then if you pass, then you go on to be a pilot. So from that moment forward, it is sit-ups, push-ups, and a mile and a half run.
Sweet. All right. Transitioning here, hard break. You sent us a bunch of fascinating stuff about like pushing the boundaries of human performance.
Who's better, Thunderbirds or Blue Angels?
Man, you want to go right there?
Yeah, who's better? Who wins in a
You're gonna go right at
dogfight?
it. You're gonna go
I
right
had
at
such
it.
an appropriate question. Drew
Alex
wants
was
to just
being
go
all.
for it.
I'm just like, who wins?
Yeah, really good question because if you had asked me this 5 years ago, 3 years ago, no, yeah, between those two,
For the
Blue
audience, we're
Angels.
talking to a former
Blue
commander
Angels.
of the Thunderbirds.
Yeah.
Yep. I am 100% ready to admit that both teams go through cultural waves, right? Both teams go through highs and lows. These teams are 70 to 75 years old, and they've been around a long time.
The teams, not the
And
pilots, just to be clear.
yeah, right. That's right. That's right. The
Okay.
pilots, 2 years. 2 years. You're in, you're out in 2 years. But these teams are 70, 75 years old, and they've gone through tons of waves of performance. And when you go back to 2018, 2019, 2020, 100% the Blue Angels were better than us. They had maintained their standard at a really high level. We actually went and talked to the Blue Angels, started integrated training with the Blue Angels to try to pick up the Thunderbirds' capabilities. And then we took that and I believe took it to the next level, which we intend to share everything that we've learned from taking a lot of the Blue Angels tactics and moving them into Thunderbirds tactics, which inevitably creates a leap where now you're going to push things to the next level. And we continue to train with those guys every March. So we'll actually go to El Centro and spend a week with them and share lessons learned to hopefully create a situation where nobody's ever able to get that far behind again. Where both teams are performing at extremely high levels at all times because America wins when that's the case. The bottom line is that I need people in the Navy. I need people in the Air Force. We need people in the Army. We fight no fight alone. And both teams at the end of the day represent the country. So I know that's a political answer, but factually, I really think both teams are extremely good right now. This is probably a high point in history for both teams, like right now.
Nice.
That's cool to hear. Looking through some of the notes you sent, there was something that resonated with me in my own experience. Not that I've ever flown any kind of aircraft. Actually, technically, when I was 12, I got to like hold the stick when my uncle was flying or something, but I don't think that counts. But
But you do
does.
live in Colorado, so you
I
got
do,
that
so
going for you.
that's probably making me better at it. Yeah. But you mentioned in some of the notes that the Thunderbirds experience accidents more often when you're flying fast, loose, comfortable, like not stuff you're normally thinking of as the most dangerous things the Thunderbirds do. And my corollary experience with that, I tore my ACL skiing, and I was really frustrated because I tore it on a run that I'd done plenty of times, wasn't worried about, shouldn't have been scary at all. And I end up sitting there with ski patrol where they're telling me my season's over and stuff like that. And the head of ski patrol
Ski patrol tells
explains,
you that when they're helping you out. You're like, oh,
well,
dude, you're done,
I
man.
didn't know anything about ACLs at the time, and I told them my symptoms, and they're like, "Well, we know what that is, and you're probably not going to ski
Oh,
for
you're
2 months."
screwed. We're gonna leave you up here.
But the head of ski patrol was talking about how that's actually for sure the case in their experience, right? People end up getting hurt on blues where they're relaxed and not worried about it because you're just inherently not as vigilant because that like fear element isn't there forcing you to think about everything you're doing. Could you kind of speak briefly to how that applies in flight and how that influences the way you lead formations like that?
Yeah, I had my boss when I was Thunderbird 1 was a one-star general who had previously been a Thunderbird 5 back in his time. And I will never forget this. He we went to dinner. He was brand new in command. I had already been on the Thunderbirds for about 6 months at the time. I thought I knew it all, of course. And he sat down with me for dinner, and he looked straight in the eyes and he goes, "Astro, I know you can't believe this right now, but someday you're going to be upside down at 100 feet going 600 miles an hour, and you're going to be thinking about your grocery list." And then that's when things get dangerous. And I thought about that, and I was like, yeah, it does sound impossible because the Thunderbird 1 job was by far the most difficult thing I've ever done from a flying perspective, from a leadership perspective. I never would have thought that, by the way. If you'd asked me that for the previous 17 years of flying jets, I just didn't realize how difficult it was. But he was 100% right. And when you look at Thunderbird accident history, it is never that they crashed when they were max performing the diamond pass and review, really trying to shack that 18-inch formation and get wingtips right up against each other. It is when people are loose and not locked on. And more importantly, when you look, I talked about those cultural waves in history, right? When the team is performing well, you can see it. We watch all the old tapes as anything we can get our hands on. We go through when we're learning how to be a part of this team because the trade craft's that important. And when you look at the high accident rate eras, the demonstration was also poor. They were loose, they were wide. It wasn't a team that got tight and into that max trust situation. And it is it is significantly correlated. So when you see high performance eras, you don't see accidents. And knock on wood, I can speak for the last 5 years, my predecessor and I, no accidents. And we were flying the closest that the team has ever been flown. So the harder we push, and this is where it gets difficult, to get back to General Goodman's point about someday it's going to get easy enough that you start thinking about other things, and that's when it gets dangerous. It was difficult for 2 years to push these pilots when they were already very good. We had gotten probably 6, 7 months into it. We had gotten to the point where we're like, I think we're breaking records right now. Like we look good. We're flying the show well. It's on time. It's on center. It's low. It's tight. It's fast. But to push them further than that and to continue to push as soon as they would get comfortable in a situation to be able to go, all right, let's tighten it up. Let's fly it closer. Let's fly it lower. That was challenging. And it's very hard to articulate the why behind that. All you have is the correlations of history, but it's very hard to understand why, other than that general's comment, which made a lot of sense to me once he said it.
I'm curious, and I don't want to go down a whole rabbit hole necessarily of sort of the world of demonstration flying, but what you're talking about in terms of high performance and the goal being super tight, super low, all of these things. To the person on the ground watching, does the difference in 18 inches versus 24 inches and what that means in terms of time training, cognitive load, et cetera, et cetera. I don't want this to come across as like blunt, but the risk versus like the reward in terms of the end goal being the enjoyment of the show, or is the risk there because the tactical takeaways for potential future combat situations is worthwhile, if that makes sense.
Oh, that's really good. It's a common question, right? Like if you're watching a Thunderbird show and you are not a like fighter pilot or someone who's seen a lot of air shows, you have no idea if we're flying 7 inches apart or 55 inches apart.
Mm-hmm.
You would, as an audience member, you can't tell. It's a really, really salient point that comes up all the time. And but here's what I've noticed. It is very difficult to define good versus extraordinary, but when you see it, you know. I think this applies across human performance, whether we're talking about Olympians here or extraordinary musicians, performers, whatever the case may be. Um, when we are flying early season shows, loose, bobbles in formation, it's not like anyone's going, "Oh man, number 3 was like 4 inches out on the right side right there." But when we fly poorly versus when we fly really well, people can feel it. How they feel it, how their brains are defining it, I couldn't tell you, but they can feel it. We can tell in the autograph line. We can tell in the reactions we get after the show. We can tell on our social media reactions. Somehow we are able to recognize peak human performance, even in fields that we're unfamiliar with.
Mm-hmm.
But how we define it, I'm not sure. Now, as far as the tactical side goes, I think you hit on something that's key. It is just this is my opinion, right? But it is, to me, the American thing to do is to push to the absolute limit and beyond because you can and because it's why we're here on this earth, right? I really believe that. I
Just
think
waiting
that's
for an
why.
eagle. I'm waiting for an eagle to fly and land on your shoulder.
Right. I mean, if you think about like the nation's identity, that's pretty much what it is. It's like, well, let's put a man on the moon because, right? Like we zero economic or tactical benefit, but we're doing it because that's the next thing that humans need to do. And we push those boundaries in all the directions, whatever it may be, with arts, science, um, performance, elite Olympics, right? It's just what we do. And and so I think it's important if we're going to be America's team, right? We're not Air Force colors. We're red, white, and blue fighter jets. That we're America's team, and I think we have to represent that. I think we have to push the boundaries at all times, or we're not doing our job. But there's another concept I want to just to kind of add to what you two are asking. Why push? Why take the risk? Why push further and harder? I have noticed with human performance, you are either playing offense or you are getting worse. I have almost never seen stable. I find that people do well when they think they are progressing, when they are pushing, when they are going, I am trying to get better. I am trying to get better. I am trying to improve, especially if you can see that incremental improvement. People do very well in those situations. As soon as people turn around and start playing defense, that is when I see people rapidly fall off from a performance perspective. I think it applies to everything from economics to flying airplanes. Um, when you are aggressively pushing forward, things tend to go well. When you turn around and start playing defense and you start getting into entitlement and I deserve this position. No one better pass me, and I'm going to try to hold this position. And you get into this point where you're kicking other people off the ladder instead of climbing the ladder. That's when I have found that teams fall apart, people fall apart. And so that was kind of my defense against that, if that makes any sense, is to just continue pushing.
Now, when I see air shows, I'm going to know that the reason they're flying so close is because it's the American thing to do. It makes me wonder how perhaps some of our international allies and their air demonstration teams justify what they do, because certainly it's not the British are doing it because it's the American thing to do. But one of the things you mentioned, the kind of blind trust component of this, and I would imagine flying at that speed, at that proximity, obviously there's a ton of that at play. So from just a very practical standpoint, what kind of exercises, techniques, like team building type things do you guys do to train for that, or can you replicate that on the ground versus just, hey, we just have to fly like this in order to kind of build up that cohesiveness?
The only job I've had in the Air Force where there is no substitute for just doing it. We try to warn the people applying for the team. We had about a 14-to-1 pilot applicant ratio for this last board to make it onto the team. So it is a lot of applicants for very few slots. So we were able to be brutally honest. And one of the things my slot pilot at the time would ask in the interviews is he would say, hey, look, do you have the discipline to stare at something for 45 straight minutes? Do you have the discipline to like stare at one thing for 45 minutes? And if you take your eye off of it, then you die. So like that was his best attempt to cage the stakes of a wingman on the ground. On the Thunderbirds, Blue Angels, exactly the same thing. You know, their viewpoint to get to this blind trust concept, their viewpoint in the sky is about a probably 3 to 4 foot overlap underneath my wing. So their helmet is about 18 inches off of the bottom of one wing, where their view is just rivets and a flap that's moving in like right above their head. They can kind of take in the side of the aircraft sitting right next to them. They're so close that I can see their red noses by my cockpit, like moving around here. So their viewpoint from the wingman perspective is a giant flap and a giant side of an aircraft. That's it. They have no perception of up, down, ground, sky, nothing. And I'm taking them in 6-ship formation down to, no kidding, 150 to 200 feet off the ground at 500 to 600 miles an hour.
No big
So
deal.
no big deal, right? It's the trust aspect. It has to be absolute, and it's not just like, okay, yep, I'm gonna just stare at my rivet and not move, and this guy will take care of it. It's so much more than that. The forces that we feel off of each other interplay. So I can feel every movement they make. And I'm not just flying straight and level, right? I'm in the middle of a loop, for example, and I can feel if I put, a thousandth of a pound of pressure to the left on my stick accidentally, I will feel number 3 loosen up on the right side as my wing moves away, and number 2 get compressed against an airwave against my left wing. And then I'll feel number 2 react to that airwave and move down. And number 3 then react to the wing coming down on his side as they bounce each other back into position, basically. Now they're not flying off of each other, right? They're just flying off of me, but their forces hit my wing and my wing moves. And then if you don't have that absolute trust, you're going to overreact to those things. And remember, you've got a slot pilot underneath as well. So you've got these 4 airplanes, sometimes 6, all within inches of each other, and the forces are pretty extreme between those wings. So you have to know that when you see lead make a movement that isn't the right movement, that you have to trust that it's going to be momentary and it's going to be quickly and smoothly corrected back to the correct position, so that you don't overreact, which will then cause more overreaction throughout the formation, and eventually just a fireball. And the only way that we get there is by starting flying very far apart. Very far apart being like 3 feet-ish,
Oh God.
but enough.
Air traffic controllers are having heart attacks right now about his definition of very far apart.
We're really far apart, guys. It's a whole yard.
It's enough that you have missed distance when you go through these things, right? So like when those rocks happen, the wings don't hit. So you'll see them, and it scares you to death, but they don't hit. And eventually, when we see those missed distances shrink, then we'll shrink the distance between airplanes as well.
You
But
ever
it's
been
all done in the air.
Have you ever been inverted with a MiG?
Been inverted in a MiG.
Oh well. Ooh, take that, Tom Cruise. As you're talking about it, honestly, weirdly, it makes me think of a Peloton in a bicycle race, where, I mean, obviously different situation, but like you mentioned, if one of you guys kind of goes awry, you end up in a explosion. Is that part of the reason why you mentioned that being Thunderbird 1 was the hardest job you'd had? Is it because so much of what you do has so, I guess, a super heavy weight attached to it? Or why do you think that it was the hardest job you'd ever had?
I'll start by just saying it's the flying is just that hard, which is not something typically a squadron commander in the Air Force. So I had a previous squadron command. I commanded the 59th Test and Evaluation Squadron. That was a big one. You know, it was 200 people. We had 6 different platforms, about 10 of each fighter type, and busy command job. But I would fly about 4 times a month, and flying for me was that was the thing I did to stay in touch. Whereas my main job was to command the squadron and drive the mission forward. Thunderbird 1 is aptly named commander slash leader. You are the commander of everything, like the 31 different job types, all your maintenance folks, all of your public affairs folks, everything from the show to the production to the logistics to get you there. It's a big squadron. And just to paint a picture of the logistics side, um, every Thursday, you fly the team out to a not Air Force base, right? Like a city's airport. Sometimes it's a very small runway in the middle of like New York's plains, and sometimes it's right next to JFK. We flew a show on Jones Beach, which was literally 5 miles off of JFK. So anything from major international airports to very small strips, but what they are not is Air Force bases that know how to handle fighter jets. So every Thursday, every single Thursday, we pack everybody and every spare part, engine, everything we've got into a C-17, fly it to these remote fields. We had to have everything with us that we would need to get through any situation we could encounter out there. So it was basically like a deployment with the C-17 and all 8 of our fighters refueling on the way there. Would land, download everything. Usually you've gone to the East Coast, you've lost several hours. And by the next morning, Friday, you wake up, you fly in the morning, and you fly it in the afternoon. And by the way, it's a completely new show site. So you've never seen that terrain before. You have to memorize a 5-mile ring around that base to understand, you know, where your reference points is for 40 different maneuvers. And then you fly the show Saturday, you fly the show Sunday, you pack it all back up on Monday, fly back to Las Vegas, you land on your home base. Tuesday is your only practice day, so you fly twice on Tuesday. Wednesday is our day off, that's our weekend. And you know, Reed also has solved any other problem that came up during the 6 days that you described. And then Thursday you do it all over again. You do that for 9 straight months. That's it. Like there aren't weekends. So no weekends for 9 straight months, and then the off season, if you will, what we call winter training, we swap out 50% of the team and we start over again. So from our last show in November to our first show in March, we fly twice a day, every day through the weekends. And that's the only way to get good enough to fly the demonstration. So the logistics side is very difficult to command. And then the flying side is so difficult just from a hands and feet perspective that it takes every bit of double turns every day for 4 straight months with no breaks to get there. And by the time I got to my first show, I was like, all right, like I put in the time and the training. I think I've got this thing doped out. Let's get after it. But nothing could really have prepared me for the pain of getting to one of these new airfields and having it figured out, only to wake up to a 1,500-foot overcast layer with high winds on the surface and realizing that I had to relearn the show with crosswinds and real weather phenomenon. That, you know, what's unique about it is in most Air Force peacetime missions, you can always do it again tomorrow, right? You can always say like, yeah, weather's terrible, I'm out, like I'll come back and do this training mission tomorrow. But not the Thunderbirds. That is that city's air show for the next 5 years. You know, a lot of towns will get an air show every 5 years, and it's kind of a no-fail mission. So you want to put up some kind of a demonstration, and sometimes that is extremely risky with what we see on the weather side of things. So it just never turns off for 2 straight years. You know, there's always a problem to deal with either someone on the team or with just the show itself. And I think that's one of the, I don't know, it's a real privilege to have done it, but it was the hardest job I've ever done.
I got to ask this quick follow on as a I don't know what jet pilots call people like me, groundlings. I don't know, but as a groundling, do you ever just look at an F-16 and be like, I don't want to fly in that today? Because I look at an F-16 and think that's the coolest thing ever. I would do that all the time, but I would imagine doing that twice a day forever. You're just like, oh man, just please no.
Yes. So, um, 100% it happens. I'm pretty sure Metallica looks at a stage and goes,
That's
"Man,
fair. Yeah, that's
really
fair.
would like to not do
Taylor
this
Swift
today."
is like, I don't
Yeah,
want to
right.
do a show.
So in hindsight, of course, I'm sure they're all like, "That was awesome. I'm glad I did it." But no, there's probably no worse feeling than waking up and looking out of your hotel window and seeing like clouds and storms and being like, "Here it comes." I'm about to go fly in that, and I'm gonna have six of my best friends glued to myself, and it's gonna be a really bad day. Yeah, I'll share this with you. I think this probably will surprise most people. I flew that demonstration by the end of it all about 630 times. Yeah, it was a lot of flying. Each one of them is about an hour-long flight, and I never fired up the engine in front of the crowd without being really nervous about it. So it never got to the point where I wasn't heart rate up, adrenaline up, nervous about what was about to happen. That surprised me.
Hmm.
But prior to the team, I had flown a lot of different airplanes, 30 plus airplanes with the Air Force, and I would absolutely get to a point of comfort with everything else that, I'd fire up the jet on a routine sortie and be like, okay, cool, I'm going flying. Certainly not nervous, maybe prepared, but not nervous. But man, Thunderbirds every time nervous.
Hmm.
Wow. So we're coming to a close here. I had one final question I did want to ask because I found it interesting in the notes you sent us. This
Sure.
is getting after some of that nervousness stuff. This is getting after cognitive performance for sure. The concept of boundary avoidance theory,
Yes.
which, as I understand it, is that humans perform better when aiming for a target rather than aiming to avoid a boundary. But can you explain what that is and the relevance of it to what you do?
Yeah. Yeah. It's huge to me. I learned it in test pilot school. And, you know, test pilot school, I seriously think that's where it came from. I think specifically it came from a guy named Evil Bill Gray who had really tried to codify this concept of what pilots call the pilot induced oscillation. I don't know if that's a familiar term, but the PIO. So this is when you are trying to land or do something high precision in an aircraft and you end up in a situation where every control input is amplifying the oscillation that you've created. So the only way to get out of it is to let go of the stick and just let everything stop happening. It's some of these pilot induced oscillations are induced by flight control issues, but many times it's your brain. And your brain is just reacting 180 degrees out of phase with what it's being presented in its feedback loop, and it can't get control of it. Well, Evil had this breakthrough um, where he was able to prove to us um, through formation flying that you are prone to these out of phase feedback inputs, these PIOs, when you are trying to avoid boundaries, but you are much less prone to these PIOs when you are aiming at a target. So the best example is if I'm driving down a highway and I tell you, hey, aim at the yellow stripe and just drive down the yellow stripe. You're going to be able to do that very well. You're going to be able to do that with precision on order of inches, probably, and consistently. But if instead I put two concrete barriers, 3 inches away from each side of your car, and I say, drive down this highway and don't hit these barriers on the side of the road, it's probably going to be about 15 seconds before you hit the barriers because you're going to see one closing on you. You're going to turn to avoid it. You're going to be too close to the other one. And, it's going to be a growing oscillation until you collide with the barrier. So you can replicate this on the ground. In fact, we used to replicate it at test pilot school, even on taxiing, just driving an airplane at 15 miles an hour on the ground. You could get into these huge oscillations side to side that would sometimes even send the thing into ground loops, which are these like spins on the ground. Um, It's amazing what your brain will do just based on how it feeds back on a target. If I put something in the distance and aim at it, you'll drive right to it. It's easy. But instead, if I put barriers around you and say, don't hit the barriers, you're hitting them. So this, you know, I think, like I mentioned in what I wrote up, the Thunderbirds had 70 years of experience that told them how to avoid boundaries, but they never said why. And I think it's just because this theory wasn't there for them to understand. As soon as I got onto the team and saw what they were doing, what the previous team members were doing, it made perfect sense to me. So one of the examples I'll give you is Thunderbird pilots trim full forward. Here's what that means. We fly the entire demonstration with a 16-pound weight in our arm to maintain level flight. So I have to pull back on the stick with 16 pounds of force to maintain level flight because I've basically put the jet in a position where it's trimmed to dive at -1G. No other type of flying uses that tech. That's insane. Like you would want the least workload possible for every other type of flying where if you let go of the stick, it flies straight, right? But if I let go of a Thunderbird stick, it dives at -1G into the ground. So we do that because now if I want to fly in position, I am having to fly to the target. I'm having to pull back on the stick with conscious positive thought to put myself in that position I want to be in. And if I want out of that situation, I just let go and it leaves. So instead of being trimmed neutral, where if I want to go up, I have to go up. And then if I see an up boundary, I have to push forward now to get down away from that boundary. With that negative trim setting, you are either pulling towards the target into position or you are not. But there's no pull, push, pull, push, pull, push, and therefore we don't get those oscillations that would be catastrophic in that close formation flight. And what's really interesting is this year, my number 2 started putting in negative trim in roll. So he actually trimmed the F-16 to roll into me without a positive push away. So now he doesn't even have that lateral boundary to avoid either on his side of the formation, which is cool. It was brand new and it worked really well.
How did that make you feel when he came up to you? He's like, "Hey man, I added some negative roll to that. So if I let go, I'm going to smash into you. Just, have fun up there."
Yeah,
Like, wait a second.
It was so cool to see him apply that pitch concept to roll and to see it work that I was just like, I love it. Genius. So yeah, it'll probably end up being the team's technique.
I think for those of us that don't fly for the Thunderbirds, when you mention boundary avoidance, I think of me as a hobbyist bowler. And when you put up gutter guards, you tend to hit them. And when they're
You hit them.
not there, you're bowling strikes. So I completely understand what you're talking about, navigating high-speed aircraft inches apart. Okay, we've arrived at the point that we warned you about at the beginning, which is the final question for all the pilots that we bring on. And I think you mentioned somewhere on the order of 30 plus planes that you've flown. So this is going to be a little bit different for you. Typically, we don't allow them to choose their plane, but it seems like all these planes are yours. So we'll take the F-16 out of this. You've got to give us your top 3 aircraft and just some caveats. It can be any point in history, and it can be, we've had to now open this up. It can be any nationality. The Spitfire had to be included for one of our conversations, so we opened it up a little bit. But anything but the F-16, and it's not quite fair because you seem to have flown everything with wings.
Gosh. All right. Well, I always answer that same way. So I'm going to try that on you, Drew. And then if that doesn't work, then you can make me add a third one. If I'm going to war right now, like in combat tomorrow, F-35. It's a great fighter jet. It's undersold, really in all fronts. If I'm just going out to have fun, F-15C. That was the last plane we built. We didn't care about stealth. We didn't care about like anything except max performance of engines and speed and wing area and just
the Dodge
awesomeness.
Charger of the sky.
Exactly. So that plane flies like something designed to be that. It's a blast to fly. Those are my top 2. F-15C is my favorite to fly just for fun. F-35 is my favorite combat airplane that we've got in the inventory. If you want to pick something outside of those two,
Yeah.
I would just kill to fly the SR-71.
The Blackbird.
Nice.
Yeah,
Nice.
yeah. I just can't
Interesting.
imagine what it would be like.
That radio check story gets me every time.
Oh, dude.
Yeah.
I love the radio check story. I got to ask, actually. So that was the last question. But before we go off of it, I watched, I think I mentioned in the email, I watched The Right Stuff the other day, and obviously Chuck Yeager and all that. Just
Yeah.
quick summary, as a test pilot yourself, how far are we advanced from what I would perceive was how it went down in the 50s of like, yeah, just go up and give it a whirl and see what happens? Or are we not?
So no, so far advanced that people wonder if we've gone too far.
Mm.
And I don't think we have. Yeah, that's a really good question, Drew. So test pilots back in the 50s, that era, the Right Stuff era, they were losing 25% of their test pilots.
Mm.
So 1 in 4 wasn't making it. That's a lot of death in experimentation. Test piloting is hard, but it is made much easier these days by modeling and simulation.
Mhm.
And the models that we are able to build on the engineering side, whether it be a series of ground tests for these things we call hardware in the loop testing or software in the loop tests, we can get so close to an accurate model that when we first flight an aircraft like the B-21 that just first flighted, it's usually going to go just fine. Now, from a safety perspective, I say that you would be amazed by how many things we still find wrong when we do those flights, even in a fairly advanced system. So just to kind of give you an example of that, we've gotten so good at the modeling and simulation that the biggest argument we face as test pilots is that the contractor and sometimes even our leadership will come to us and say, hey, look, we've seen the models, it's good, we don't need to test this. Like, let's just get it to the field. And any experienced test pilot's going to push back right away and be like, they're the unknown unknowns, right? They're the things that we didn't know to look for in the models that we're probably going to find. And I swear, every time I take a new system up, when someone told me we shouldn't test this, let's just press, I find some pretty debilitating things about the platform.
Mhm.
I've had systems, the F-15C is a 50-plus-year-old aircraft right now. We put one new piece of hardware in it. We were told everything was going to be great and it couldn't possibly go wrong. And it turned out it was measuring its angle of attack wrong by about 70%, and which is going to lead you towards flat spins. And then when you did get into a flat spin, the recovery controls were reversed. So pretty catastrophic stuff for a system that we were told we didn't even need to look at. And that's not atypical. So we've
Wow.
advanced, but we've advanced so far that now people are telling us the models are perfect. They are
Man.
not.
Jeez. All right. Well, I
Wow.
will not ask any more last questions. We will close it here and we will say thank you for coming on all the way from Rome. This has been a fascinating conversation.
Right back at you. This has been awesome to talk to you guys. I really, really do want to know more about what you're doing with breathing on the Army side because it's at least correlated and probably directly related to what we're doing.
Oh, for sure. Hey, Alex, let's cover our ass real quick.
Oh, great idea, Drew. All right, guys. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent.
Thanks for tuning into this week's episode. Before you go, please rate and review the pod on the listening platform of your choice. You can also visit us on our website at www.mopsinmos.com. That's mops, the letter N, mos.com. You can check out the library of podcast episodes, our latest blog entries, any helpful resources, and also sign up for our newsletter.
Drew nailed it. Just to underline a couple of things, the podcast entries have in-depth show notes on the website. So if you missed anything or you want to read any of the research we talk about, it is all there. You can, at the bottom of the website, sign up with your email and receive future updates from us. The blog posts go a little bit more in depth in kind of written form on a couple of topics we get questions about all the time. But most importantly, I just want to ask all you guys, our best way the word gets out is absolutely word of mouth. So tell your friends, tell the people you work with, anybody you think would find it useful. Thanks for spreading the word.
If you have any questions or comments, feel free to shoot us an email at either Drew or Alex at mopsandmos.com.
Or there's a contact form on the website.
Thank you.